I'm Stan Barnes, and I'm here with Eddie Hatch, and we're Barnes Capital Group. Welcome to this edition of Barnes Quarterly. We're midway through the year here in 2021 and moving into the summer. We've had a really nice spring leading up to the summer months this year, and summer seems to be hitting with a vengeance as the mercury seems to be rising in the thermometer. As far as what we've been up to, we have been quite busy. A lot of that busyness has been generated because we've been through a tax season, and there is a fair amount of buzz about potential new tax laws and how they might impact your investments from the standpoint of capital gains. Also, from an estate planning standpoint, could there be new higher tax rates on estates and how that might impact your planning? So that has generated a lot of interest and a lot of activity. As always, we will be joined today by our Chief Investment Officer, Chris Zaccarelli, who's going to give us a little bit of an update on the market. And we're restoring a segment of our podcast that we kind of got interrupted by with the pandemic, and that is we wanted to give a few moments to a local nonprofit because that is a group that we really focus on serving. So we'll be joined today by Felina Martin, who is with INIE, which is the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence. Chris, as always, thanks for taking time out to visit with us this afternoon and kind of give us an update on what's been going on in the markets. We're about midway through the year, and it seems to have been a relatively active one coming out of the pandemic. But just tell us what you sort of observed and what you're seeing going forward.
Well, it seems like 2021 is continuing in the way we ended 2020, which is on a positive note. We're seeing the stock markets continue to move higher around the world. The U.S. is, as measured by the S&P 500, is up about 12%, almost halfway through the year. And so we're seeing a lot of positive fundamentals driving stock prices higher. We've got a Federal Reserve that's been very accommodative and providing a lot of monetary support. And you've also got fiscal support coming out of Washington in the form of stimulus bills. So it's been a pretty conducive environment for higher stock prices. So it's been an interesting year, but it's continued to be positive, which is great for all of us.
So I guess all eyes are sort of on the Fed, particularly this week. Chairman Powell spoke earlier this afternoon. I know there's a lot of buzz about fears of inflation, questions whether it's transitory or it's real. What do you think we could see coming out of the Fed, and what do you think about the inflation discussion?
I think you put your finger right on it. A lot of discussions right now are centering around inflation, whether or not it's transitory, like the Fed keeps talking about, or whether there's something a little bit more persistent. And unfortunately, that's something we're not going to know for some time, at least for the next few months. Inflation is almost guaranteed to be higher, both because it was so low last year due to the artificially depressed part of the economy, but also because coming out of an artificial slowdown. And so just by the nature of reopening and seeing a lot of people get back to work and back to shopping and consuming as they did in the past, you're seeing a big bump up. So it's too early to tell whether or not inflation will end up being transitory or end up being persistent. But I think it makes sense to stick to your investment plan to make sure that you are prepared for either scenario. And ultimately, one of the best inflation hedges out there is probably the stock market. And so you want to make sure that you have your stock investments. The last thing you want to do is be in cash. Cash is the worst investment you could possibly have in an inflationary environment. So I think that's important to remember.
So I guess I've heard from some people that they're sort of looking out until August of the summer. They're expecting that if the Fed is going to make a move or an announcement, it's probably going to be maybe in August at the Jackson Hole meeting. Are you sort of in that camp, or what are your thoughts there?
Well, given that the Fed was meeting today, there was always a possibility that they would start talking about tapering at today's meeting. no one expected them to lay out the plan for how they would taper, but they'd at least begin talking about what's going to be their framework for how they begin tapering or reducing the amount of quantitative easing that they've been doing so far with all of their bond purchases. And so for the most part, the Fed has continued to just say it's much too soon to talk about it. They're very focused on the employment picture, making sure that they can see unemployment rates go down to lower levels. They said it's keeping an eye on inflation, and they said they could be wrong in terms of things being transitory. But their expectation as of this point is that inflation will stay controlled and stay, under 3%, let's say. And so because of those reasons, it is a lot more likely that the Fed will begin doing their communication around when they're going to be doing this tapering. And in late August, when they have the Jackson Hole Symposium, their annual meeting out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that is typically when they make a lot of policy announcements. So I think there's a very good possibility that's when they begin talking about it. But it really will depend on whether or not the job market is doing better. As most people know, the Fed is supposed to be focused just on two things, making sure that we're at maximum employment, and that we have price stability. So that's their employment and their inflation mandates. And right now, they've communicated over and over again that they're much more concerned about the labor market. So unless you see unemployment getting a lot lower, it's likely that the Fed is going to be keeping an eye on inflation, but they're much less likely to move in terms of raising rates or tapering in this environment, in a post-COVID environment, than they have in years past. Clearly, in the past, they've been a lot more focused on inflation, even though employment has always been important to them as well.
So for those of our listeners that may not be as familiar with the lexicon of investing, when you say tapering, you're referring to reduced purchasing of bonds, I'm guessing, and higher interest rates. What else is entailed in tapering?
So yeah, tapering is literally the reduction in the amount of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities that they're currently buying. So right now they're buying $120 billion per month of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities combined. And so tapering would be lowering that to $110 billion or $100 billion. Ultimately, the Fed is going to want to stop purchasing bonds, which is what they call quantitative easing. So they're going to want to go from $120 billion a month down to $0 per month. Presumably, they're going to want to wait a few months, somewhere 3 to 6 months, you would think at least, before they begin raising interest rates. And so everyone is looking to see what the plan is for tapering, because that will give you a good idea of when the next rate hike might come. But for now, they're neither talking about tapering nor talking about raising rates, with the exception of the Fed meeting today, where a lot of the Federal Open Market Committee members put their projections for the future, and quite a few of them have a projection that rates will start rising at the end of 2022. So we at least have a line in the sand where over the next 18 months, you would expect tapering to begin and potentially end, and then at some point, the Fed would start raising rates. But that's a very contingent forecast. It's very much going to depend on what happens with the employment market as well as what happens with inflation, because either one of those variables could cause them to speed up or slow down that timeline.
Okay, and the last item I'd like to spend a little time talking about, I sent you an article that recently appeared in Fortune magazine in the June-July edition of this year, and it was an article that specifically was sort of talking about the, I guess, gap in style between a father who I guess presumably would be a baby boomer and his son who is, I guess, in his 20s, and just the way that they approach investing is vastly different. And I think we've seen a lot of the new innovations that the younger investors are utilizing come into play really over the last 12 to 18 months. And so I guess one of the statistics that they listed was that the market cap of Walmart is roughly around $400 billion. The market cap of Bitcoin is $780 million. Also, the increase in the price of Berkshire Hathaway Class B shares in 2020 was 2.4%. The increase in Tesla share price over the same period was 743%. And so, talk a little bit about, I guess, the older generation of which I'm part, and the younger generation that seems to be making a lot of ripples in the investing world right now.
Well, it's definitely an interesting article, and I think it really captured a lot of the culture that's out there in terms of younger investors trying to get rich quick, quick to embrace all the new technologies, and really speculating more than investing per se. And so it reminded me so much of the 1990s, of which I think we all remember, where, starting in 1995, you had a younger group of investors betting on tech stocks, betting on the internet, and basically saying that Warren Buffett was old and washed up and he didn't know what he was doing. And so, sure enough, 5 years later, we had the massive crash, and Warren Buffett, again, after 50 years, and now it's 70 years, had the last laugh, because at the end of the day, fear and greed never change, and revenues minus expenses are always profits. So there's certain maxims that will never change, and that doesn't matter what new technologies come along. And sure enough, the automobile changed the world, the railroads changed the world, the internet actually changed the world, and it's very possible that cryptocurrencies or some of these new technologies, whether it's electric vehicles, will change the world. But just because you've got world-changing technologies doesn't mean you have great investments. Along with every new technology will come along hundreds, if not thousands, of competitors. 99.9% of them will all go bankrupt. You'll lose 100% of your money on all those speculative investments. And there will be those few, like Amazon back in the 1990s, that will persevere, and maybe they will change the world. But there's a big difference between investing and making sure that you've got a diversified portfolio that's as close to guaranteed as possible to make it through a larger economic cycle, versus just one single speculation, which is much more of a long shot. So I think it's really important to keep in mind, there's speculation and gambling, and then there's investing. Everything entails risk. There's no guarantee in investing either. But at least if you follow those investing rules that have worked for 500 years or more, you've got a much better chance of success at the end of the line than you do of just following individual speculation. So I think it's always interesting to see there's a new generation that comes along. They think they know better than everyone else, and they get pretty confident in their approach. And unfortunately, with that hubris comes the ultimate end. So whether it continues for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, I'm pretty confident that what Warren Buffett has been doing for the last 75 years will keep working for the rest of his life and well beyond it, despite what new technologies we may see, and despite the contempt that younger generations continue to have for their elders. It does seem that with age comes wisdom, even though youth brings a lot of overconfidence and excitement in the short run. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Well, I think that a lot of the, activity in these newer investment opportunities and newer technologies is credited. Their popularity is credited because a lot of people were at home with nothing to do, and so they got these stimulus checks from the government and wanted to put the money to work. And so Robinhood kind of that brokerage service sort of rode the crest of that wave, and as well as others. And that's, I think, the pandemic is being attributed to the cause of a lot of the increase in volume in terms of retail investors. But I think I think that it's probably good to be mindful and become educated on the newer opportunities, such as crypto and other types of investments. But also, don't forget that there are some fundamental truths to investing too.
I think that's really well said. And again, I think, Robinhood and some of these newer trading vehicles are again pushing change, and it's likely that some of the innovations they come up with will be copied by the existing competitors. And there's other changes that they'll make that potentially will be rolled back or will be regulated out of existence. Time will tell. But there are echoes of the 1990s, because I'm sure you remember back then you'd had to go to Merrill Lynch and spend $200 for every stock trade, and along came E-Trade and Ameritrade, and for $9.99 or $4.95, you were able to make stock trades. You were able to do everything online instead of calling over the phone. And so there are innovations that are going to be made by new entrants into the marketplace, and some of those may force a lot of the existing players to adapt to those innovations. A lot of the innovations are good, and a lot of times it's great for consumers. It lowers costs. It brings new entrants into the marketplace, and so we can't just dismiss all of that new activity. But again, I think you want to separate out the good innovations from the idea that this time is different, and all of a sudden there's a new way to make money that's never been around before, and everything that everyone else has done up to this point is wrong, and they've found the new holy grail. I'd always be a little bit cautious when I see the get rich quick schemes. That always sets off alarm bells in my head for sure.
Well, very good. Well, we're going to let you go. I understand you and your family found your way down to the Gulf Coast of Florida, and hopefully had a good trip.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it. The Florida coast is beautiful. It's as nice as everyone said. We had a great vacation. We really enjoyed it, and we'll definitely be back. So you guys have some really nice beaches down there. Hopefully the secret won't get out too far. We're coming down from Charlotte, but I'd love to keep it a secret as best we can. I think the cat may be out of the bag at this point, though.
Well, very good. Well, listen, have a good rest of the week, and thanks again for your time.
So as Stan suggested earlier, today we are joined by Felina Martin from INIE. Felina, thank you for joining us here today. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about INIE and what your mission is?
Sure, and thank you so much, Stan and Eddie, for the invitation to participate. I'm very excited. But the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence, our mission is to strengthen the nonprofit sector. And we do that through education, collaboration, and advocacy. So that's the formal thing of what we do. We really prevent nonprofits from closing their doors, and we really try to help them be more sustainable organizations. So again, formal mission statement, but really in light of COVID, at the forefront of our mind right now, Eddie, it is all about sustaining our nonprofits, preventing their doors from closing so they can do the work that they do in our community. That is the biggest thing that we're doing right now.
Do you see that continuing on into the future for quite a while, or is there what's sort of the next steps for you and the organization?
Yeah, that mission will never change. I'd love for your listeners to reflect back to when we had the recession back in the 2008, 2009 days. Hope I'm not causing any PTSD back there. You think about that in the market at that time, a lot of people took a big hit. It's very heartbreaking. But when you think about the results of that, it not only impacted individuals and families and businesses, but it also took a big hit on nonprofit organizations. You can imagine with families needing more services, that means that your nonprofit organizations were taxed or maxed out on food pantries, on helping with utility assistance, rent assistance. And so that 2008, 2009, we were starting to see a number of nonprofits be hit financially and not being able to serve the community. As a result, 2010, 2011, you started seeing a lot of nonprofits who went through their reserves and had to make a decision to close their doors. So one of the things that in Tallahassee specifically that I use as an example of one of those organizations that took a hit was the Mary Brogan Museum of Art and Science downtown. This incredible, beautiful facility was created to help our children with STEM, to get our kids up to speed so that they would be knowledgeable and well-versed on science, technology, engineering, and math. Definitely that topic has not changed. But 10 years, they survived 10 years, but after 10 years, if you pull it up in Wikipedia, it will state that Mary Brogan Museum of Art and Science had to close their doors due to the lack of finances or financial support. Something like that, an institution in our community having to close their doors is really heartbreaking. Another example that I use to show the ramifications of a recession and the reason why we're still in, it's always about sustainability. as positive as our mission statement is, it's still always going to be about sustainability. But another example is we are in the capital of Florida, and we do not have a YMCA, an organization that has been in existence serving the globe, people around the globe for over 150 years. And we were not able to maintain our YMCA in the capital city. It served our community for over 65 years. It helped children learn how to swim. It built just wonderful social activities, not only for kids, but also for our seniors. A wonderful institution. And we no longer can say that we have that available in our community. And so, Eddie, in my mind, it's always about sustainability. And really, that will never change because all the nonprofits, they have the heart of gold trying to serve our community.
We're honored to work with a number of not-for-profit organizations in town, and I think a number of them are members. In fact, we were doing some background checking on you, Felina.
Yes! Oh my goodness!
We're talking to Liz Murphy over at ELC.
Yes.
Had a meeting with her yesterday, and I was impressed by the fact that she said she really felt like she had gotten a lot of value out of her membership, and that you had actually reached out to her to personally reached out to her to inform her about some programs that were upcoming that maybe she should consider sending some of her staff to. And we try and operate on a very high-touch basis with our clients, and it sounds like you may share that same philosophy. But tell us about where are you in terms of the penetration into the not-for-profit sector? Are there groups that aren't members yet that you would like to be members, or do you feel like you've pretty much covered the waterfront?
And how do they get involved if they're not currently?
Yes, that's a great question. And no, you could never really fully exhaust 100% of the market. I mean, I'd love to say in all the technical terms that we've had 100% penetration on this or 30%. There's 2,600 nonprofit organizations that are registered in Leon County alone. Wow. 2,600, which is an astounding number, right? So you look at that. Then most recently, I did some research, which I absolutely love, mining for data. But out of the 2,600, Stan, only 26% of them, I think it was 26 or 36%, it basically ended up coming like 683 nonprofits are actually active out of that 2,600. And how do we define active? It means that nonprofit has raised $1 or more. Mm-hmm. Okay, so active. So then you narrow that market down, and right now we represent 120 nonprofit organizations, and we are excited about the number that we represent, but in all honesty, we represent all of them, including the 2,600, including the ones that are non-active. Because to your point earlier with like Liz Murphy with ELC, last year, again, hard hit in our community, our economy. What we did was we advocated heavily to receive funding for the nonprofit sector through different relief efforts. So, for example, Blueprint had funding, Office of Economic Vitality, they were putting funding out to small businesses. Well, we were right there saying, okay, don't forget the nonprofits are businesses as well too. They're employing a number of people in our community. In fact, 1 in 10 jobs in Tallahassee is in the nonprofit sector. So they were phenomenal. Everyone with that Blueprint and OEV decision, they made a decision, $1 million for the nonprofit sector. The county, money came down from federal, came down to our community. Big advocates between INIE, COCA, and UPHS, all advocating, and we were able to secure $3 million to be dedicated to the nonprofit sector. So all of that being said, it trickles down that, of course, we are on the phone, we being myself, United Partners for Human Services, Council on Cultural and Arts, all of us were on the phone calling all of our members, all of our constituents, all those who we serve, and said, you've got to apply for these funds. So it warrants that type of hands-on type of relationship because some of the organizations were not even aware that the grant was available. And just to let you know, There's another 3 million coming in the pipeline. So if you're listening to this, guess what? Perfect timing. And I say you being whether you are a nonprofit organization or you represent on the board of a nonprofit organization, I'm speaking directly to you. The next round of $3 million will come out. I believe they're going to open up the portal for applications late July. Eddie and Stan, late July, they'll open up the portal, and everyone should be prepared. You, as a nonprofit organization, you can apply and receive up to $20,000 from this.
And what are the parameters for being awarded that?
Sure. And actually, depending on when everyone hears this, but on June the 22nd, there will be an introductory meeting to discuss this. We have the county and the city are partnering together on this $3 million to the nonprofit sector. And definitely one of the parameters, you have to be a 501c3 or a 501c19, which is a veteran status nonprofit organization. You have to be one of those two and registered in the county, Leon County. That's top number one priority.
Okay.
There is not an eligibility minimum for a number of employees. That was definitely something that we advocated for because there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that are operated by volunteers, straight out volunteer base. So those are two, and I'm going a little bit blank on some of the other ones, but this has been the most easiest eligibility requirements that I have personally seen with the local funding that's being distributed. So, I think the only exemptions are associations are not a part, they're not eligible, and churches, and even with churches, there's a caveat on that, depends on if they're providing human service related programs and things of that nature. But again, you can look out for more information about that. It will be on INIE's website. We'll have all of the eligibility on there, and it'll definitely be on the city and the county's website as well, too.
Well, that's big news.
It is. It's exciting news. It's very exciting news. I will say that investment into the nonprofit sector is an investment in our community because it will come back in twofold. You mentioned Liz with Early Learning Coalition. For those who are not familiar with that organization, I mean, just think about the tremendous contribution they provide in ensuring that our daycare centers, our child care centers are up to par and open and available to parents. If you do not provide child care for the kids, then here goes your workforce. It is, we all believe that kids should be first and taking care of our families should be first. So how could we possibly think that we could fully reopen as a country and fully have people coming back in droves to work if their children are not being taken care of? And so ELC, the work that they provide is vital. It's very vital.
Well, as is the work that you do, and the not-for-profits are a very important part of the fabric here in Tallahassee, and it's great to have an organization like yours that's supporting their efforts and helping them be better at what they're attempting to do and have that resource there. So is there anything else that you want to get out there or blast out there? Or do you think that kind of covers what? Did that do you justice to as far as what we've talked about? Or
yes, and there's so much in this world of the nonprofit sector, and I would just really emphasize, if I haven't, to your listeners about the importance of their service on boards. And so the nonprofit leaders, they know the sacrifices they're making personally to commit to a nonprofit sector, their career and leadership. And those who are serving on boards, it is the same emotional connection to that nonprofit that you're committing and contributing your time and expertise. But by far, what we are learning in the sector is we've always known how vital and how critical board of directors are, but it's now convincing them how truly important they are. It is wonderful that you have confidence in your executive director and the staff of the organization, but they need your support now more than ever. They need the innovation that you bring to the table, your creativity, the business thinking, the entrepreneurial spirit, every aspect. There is a reason why they sought you out to serve on the board. And I will guarantee you the majority of the time, it wasn't just because you had a nice name that looked or sound good. They really need that expertise for boards to step up. Right. And that's my biggest appeal to your listeners is if you are serving on a board, then really, it's time to roll up your sleeves and really get into the trenches to keep that nonprofit sustainable, because your fiduciary responsibilities are tied to the livelihood of that nonprofit as well, too.
Well, very good. Well, hopefully some of our listeners will take that to heart if they aren't already active. But
thank you.
Again, just like to thank you for coming out today and giving of your time, and we'll do our best to put the word out and get people more involved in what you're doing and what not-for-profits are doing here in town.
All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. The opinions voiced in this show are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your attorney, accountant, and financial advisor or tax advisor prior to investing. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance, a registered investment advisor. IAA and Barnes Capital Group are separate entities from LPL Financial.